Okay, well, we might introduce Matt from Rooftop Honey, who's going to talk to us all about swarming. Thanks, Matt.
All right, thank you. So yes, thanks for inviting me to come and talk. And so swarms, the hot topic of spring. And so I hope I'll keep it brief and hopefully factual and not bore you too much with it. But yeah, this time of year, spring, we're excited to get out into our hives, have a look what's going on, and see what's happened in our hives over the winter and how they've fared. And what we've already just learned there is winter to winter, the bees will reduce in size quite differently from season to season, depending on how bitter and cold those winters will be. And what we expected was this to be a cold winter, and it turns out it didn't really get that cold as we were hoping or expecting. We saw queens really laying was slowing down their brood laying before the winter, and that's what was indicating that it was going to be a cold winter, but then it kind of never happened. So what we are seeing now is large colonies in spring already in our hives. And something that we've got to consider is the bees going through their democratic process of decision making about what's happening with the colony, would have already decided if they are going to swarm. Some people even say in the autumn when you're packing them down, some say during the winter, but right now is essentially if they've decided they're going to swarm, they're waiting for the first warm days to really get that all together and get it happening. So springtime is the hot time for beekeepers to be managing their swarming. And I use the term swarm management because we often get asked to talk about swarm prevention, or we are asked to how to prevent swarming, how to stop swarming. The basic question, the answer to that question is you can't. We have to learn how to manage swarming, because it does happen. You can get caught out. You may miss something. Your timing may even be wrong to get into the hive. Swarms do happen, and it is how you manage those swarms and how you manage the bees that want to swarm. So bees naturally want to swarm. That is their way of reproducing and taking over the world, like all animals on the planet. That is what they do. So what is swarming? Essentially, the colony raising another queen and creating the ability for one colony to split into two colonies to be full functional colonies separately from each other. With Apis mellifera, the old queen is the queen that leaves the hive, and so amongst different different bee species around the world, we see somewhere the new queen leaves the hive and somewhere the old queen leaves behind. So swarming is that process. The bees make a decision, the worker bees make a decision that they're going to swarm and divide the colony. They will take a new egg that's been laid by the queen, and they will make a queen cell from that. And when generally just before that queen hatches, the old queen will leave with as many loyalists as possible. They can sometimes do that in many short hops to get to a good suitable place where the scouts have gone out and found somewhere for them to create a new colony. And then they'll set up that new colony, leaving the new queen behind in the hive to manage that new colony. So bees want to swarm. They're looking for an opportunity to swarm. Springtime is when they really want to do it because they've got the rest of the season ahead of them to build up. So what are those triggers for swarming? And we just heard before, overcrowding. So that is one of the biggest ones that can catch us out at this time of the year. Supersedure, and there's another reason we'll go into. But the first one, overcrowding, and this is the main one we're looking at the minute, is what is going on inside your hive? How have they fared over the winter? Have they consumed the stores you left on them? Or have they brought more stores in over the winter, which can very much happen, and we believe that's happened this winter. And then as soon as they're running out of room, and like we said, they've got the rest of the season ahead of them, that can be that switch that says, okay, we can afford to swarm. Let's do this. So making sure they have enough room, but also being careful, especially we do get some cold snaps through the spring, and that can catch beekeepers out, is not having too much room on your hive. So yeah, it is a management game of knowing what's going on in there, and that is the main thing. Opening your hive, getting inside your hive, knowing what's going on inside your hive. That's the number one way to manage swarming. So that trigger for swarming, the overcrowding, is definitely the one that we're more attentive of in the spring. The other triggers for swarming, supersedure, the queen not being able to keep up to the standards that the workers would like. She may be getting old, not laying as a high capacity as she was, starting to lose pheromones. All of these kinds of things can lead to supersedure swarming. And the other one, so early on in our beekeeping career, we had learnt the triggers for swarming, and we had a colony that we had enough room on the hive. It was a giant hive. They had loads of room. The queen was young and new. Everything looked amazing, but this one particular hive just continually made queen cells, and we were battling it the whole season. And we ended up asking one of the older beekeepers at our club back then about what are we doing wrong? What aren't we getting here? What's the bigger piece of this puzzle? Why are they wanting to swarm? We had everything covered. And we were told quite simply is because it's a big, strong colony they can afford to split into two. And that was the other thing that was just so logical that we hadn't been taught, so it caught us out, is yes, of course, if they can afford to split, they will. And so they'll take an opportunity to do that, even when you're doing everything right. So that then comes back to what we're talking about, swarm management rather than swarm prevention or stopping swarming. So knowing those three triggers allows you then, when you're going through your hive at the different times of the year, to manage those three main triggers, and seeing, knowing what's going on, what time of the year, when those triggers are more relevant, and then how to manage that. So how to manage this time of year is regular inspections and know what's going on inside your hive. To know what you're looking for as well, not just what's going on. So at our club, we talk about how many boxes of brood you should have for your colony of bees. And it comes up especially when we're talking about flow hive owners having one brood box, and some beekeepers like just a single brood box and will run excluders and things like that. And we try to generally recommend that beekeepers run 2 boxes of brood. And we kind of explain it with a simple bit of maths is, we know a queen in the peak of her season can lay one side of one frame per day. So in our 8-frame boxes, generally the outside 2 frames are honey, which is a bit of thermal mass for them to protect the brood. And so we have our honey on the outside. The next frame in, generally we've got some pollen. And then the other 4 in between that, we've got our brood. So those 4 frames give us 8 sides of a frame. And I could ask the question to you all: how long does it take for a queen to from egg to hatching? Queen, anyone want to yell it out? No. All right. So 16 days. So you've got 8 days of laying on your 4 frames there. So your queen's going around in a single box of brood, laying, looking for anywhere else to lay, because those eggs haven't hatched, or the eggs haven't turned into pupated, and you haven't got bees emerging. So we're talking about the queen is a 16-day process. The workers are 21 days. So For the queen to continually lay, and that is all that the workers want from her, we need 21 days of laying space for the queen to be able to go all the way through laying and then come back to the start, and those cells then to be empty for her to lay again. And so to do that 21 days of laying, we need our 10 and a half frames, or 10 and a half sides of, 10 and a half full frames for 21 sides. So that's why we recommend 2 brood boxes, because you've got your outers that generally get used with that. And then you've got your 4, your 6 frames in box 1, box 2, which then gives us enough space for the queen to be able to go all the way through and get back to the start and have enough room to lay. So not having enough room to keep up with all of that brood will mean that the queen will then slow down her laying or can stop laying, waiting for cells to become available. As soon as that starts to happen, that is when the workers decide, okay, we need to divide. There's not enough room here to keep the colony as strong as we'd like to keep it. The other thing that can happen is we have a boom of nectar happen during that time when the queen is laying heavily, and there isn't enough room. The workers have stored as much nectar as they can in the honey boxes, so they start to then look for any empty cells to store any extra nectar, and that is then it fills the brood chamber, and the queen then becomes honey bound and unable to lay because all of those cells are consuming honey. Those honey cells then don't hatch out like workers would, so they're permanently filled and you've lost that laying capacity. And so with that, you need to have enough space for that queen to be able to lay and for the workers to be able to store their nectar, and that is making sure you're getting in there and checking it. And so back knowing how long it takes for a queen to develop with that 16 days, we often talk about how often to get inside your hive and check your hives. And as especially newer beekeepers, we suggest every 10 days. And that's for a good reason. 10 days allows you to go in, check your bees, and with going in every 10 days, knowing what's going on, you are well more likely to see a queen cell and be able to manage what you're going to do when you find it. Being 16 days for a queen cell from being laid to emerging doesn't mean you've got 16 days to catch it out. The swarms generally happen before that queen emerges from that cell. So we see swarms generally on day 14 of that 16-day cycle. So going into your hive every 10 days is a great way to manage what's going on. And then if you can't get in on day 10 because of weather, you've got day 11, and then you've got day 12 even if you need to. So 10 is a good number to keep to be checking your hive to manage your swarms, and making sure you've got enough space. So when we're in there, we're looking for all of those things. Is there enough? Is there food coming in? Is there disease? Is there enough space? Is there any signs of swarming? So regular inspections and knowing what's going on in your hive, knowing what you're looking for. So the queen cells, I'm not sure if everyone has seen queen cells or not, but a queen cell can range in size. The same colony can make really large queen cells, and they can make much smaller, harder to see queen cells. We have seen what we believe is the worker bees going to extreme efforts to hide queen cells from us, it seems like. So generally, on a frame of brood, when you see a whole lot of cells in the middle of that frame, there is a belief that those cells in the middle of a frame are supersedure cells when they're looking at replacing their queen because of an issue. When we see queen cells hidden in the gaps in the side and along the bottom bar and those kinds of places, that is our swarm cells. So there's a bit of a belief that you can try and see the difference in where they're putting their queen cells as to what's going on. And your traditional queen cell will hang out. How do we show it with that? It'll look like literally your the end of your little finger hanging out from the frame. It is the only cell inside the beehive that hangs vertically. So that is establishing if you have queen cells. A lot of the time we see queen cups, and some colonies always have queen cups in the hive. Doesn't mean they're going to make it into a queen cell. It doesn't mean they're going to swarm. It is just that some colonies always have the base of a queen cell there ready in case they need to make it quickly. So you can choose to get rid of those queen cells when you see them. And you can choose to get rid of those queen cups as well when you see them. But if they are wanting to make them, they're generally going to keep making them until you take the time to understand what is going on. So if you're doing your inspection and you see your queen cell, you then have to decide, how am I going to manage this? Your bees have decided they're going to swarm. So we talk about splits and artificial swarms. We talked about that a fair bit with beekeeping. The main difference, they're essentially the same thing. The main difference with splitting and artificial swarming is if there is a queen cell present, basically. If you're splitting a colony, it's you doing it before they've made a queen cell. If you see a queen cell and then you divide them, that's an artificial swarm. That's the basics of that. So you have to decide with that queen cell, the most basic method of managing that even we were taught when we first learnt beekeeping was to get rid of queen cells. We don't want swarming. So whenever we see queen cells, we get rid of queen cells. And we made a really bad mistake in our early days of beekeeping. We were told in suburbia, no swarming, so get rid of all queen cells. And we were a couple of months into our beekeeping journey, and we found queen cells in our colony. And so we got rid of those queen cells as we were told to do. And then when we got to the end of the hive inspection and we were putting the hive back together, my wife and I were talking about it. It looked good in there, yes, but there wasn't that much brood. There's a little bit of cat brood, but I don't recall seeing any younger brood. And then we had the conversation back and forth. We didn't see the queen, but did we see eggs? No. We didn't see any larvae? No. And we saw a lot of queen cells, but we got rid of all of those because we were being diligent. And then when we sat down and thought about it, we realized that we had just killed off that colony because they had lost their queen, whether it was us having accidentally done that in our last inspection or something had happened to that queen. We had then just ruined any chance of that colony surviving. And so we then quickly had to buy a queen, put it in that colony and keep it alive. But our mistake of just doing what we were told and not thinking about what we're doing. So once you see that queen cell, it's a matter of looking at why they are doing it. Are they doing it because they are out of room? Are they doing it because there isn't brood? There's not enough eggs in the colony. The queen's not up to standard. Or if all of those conditions are right, are they doing it just because they can afford to split? So understanding why they're wanting to swarm and make those queen cells can decide on how you're going to manage it. So splitting is a very effective way, or artificially swarming them is a very effective way. Once the workers have got that in their heads that they're going to swarm, you can remove those swarm cells, queen cells, continually for the rest of the season and just be fighting with them, and they're going to be continually trying to build them so that they can swarm whilst you're hoping they'll become productive. And basically you're just going to fight them for that season, and it's not going to be a great season. So a lot of the time you have to make the decision to artificially swarm, which involves splitting that colony into two. And in one of the boxes, your old queen will go, and in one of the other boxes is where your queen cell will go. And then it's a matter of dividing up some brood, some eggs, some stores, and enough workers to keep both of those colonies going. There's a lot of different methods of splitting, in facing the second box in certain directions and putting one on top of the other and all these kinds of things. So it can be done very, very simply. Divide up all of the resources that the colonies need, split them into the two, hive, queen in one, cell in the other, and let them work it out. The only thing to really keep in mind when you're making splits is the foraging flying bees know how to make their way back home to the original hive. So if you're going to leave one of those hives in place and have another split near it, put more of the workers into the split, and then the nurses are compelled to stay with that brood that they're on, as where the workers will come back to the other hive. So yeah, just so you end up with enough bees in both boxes. What else? That's one of the best ways to deal with it. That once you split the colony, you have then taken the instinct of swarming away from that colony. You have the ability to keep a split on your property for up to 13 weeks above and beyond your hive density allowance. And then you can choose at the end of that 13 weeks if you recombine it with your original colony and decide which queen you're keeping. And over those 13 weeks, you get to see the temperament of both of those colonies. Or you can have a second hive, or you can then give it away if you are at your hive capacity. So it does give you some options to do that. A little bit of work, a little bit more resource requirement with having boxes and things and extra frames to manage that. But it is, we think, the most effective way of doing it, of managing those swarms. The other thing is the swarm cells that you miss. So for some reason you couldn't get in as quickly and as often as you wanted to. You couldn't get all the way to the bottom of the box because the bees got angry and you planned to come back a day or two later. For any of those reasons, one swarm cell missed is all it takes for a swarm. And then once your bees swarm, you then have another job of collecting your swarm. So it is beekeepers' responsibility to collect swarms, whether they're your own or not. It is just a known thing that beekeepers will collect swarms. So bait boxes, we often use bait boxes on a lot of our sites in the CBD. We use bait boxes in case we miss something and there is a swarm. Or even if there is just a swarm from another beekeeper, having a large presence in the CBD means any bee issue now in the CBD will be our fault. So we need to have the ability to manage that for our own bees as well as any other bees that are around. So bait boxes for us we use, and bait box, a nucleus sized box is quite good, small entrance. And you can get chemical pheromone lures. You can use lemongrass as lure, as an oil, or even as the raw plant, and foundation. So some people attempted to put comb in their bait boxes, which is against the Biosecurity Act. So foundation is allowed to go in. Foundation only, has to be unused new foundation. And one of the mistakes that some beekeepers also make in their bait boxes is filling it with frames. And so through some science now, we understand that when scouts are going and looking for a new place to set up for their colony, they're looking for, in general, a cavity of around 40 litres in size and an opening preferably at about 2 metres off the ground. This is the absolute perfect of what a scout is looking for. We can mistakenly fill a bait box with frames, and when those scouts come in and feel around looking for the volume to report back to the rest of the colony, if it's full of frames, they'll say, no, we haven't got that 40 litre mark that we're looking for. That's not a very good option. We'll move on to the next. So what we do is when we're using foundation, if you're going to use foundation, it's one frame of foundation in that bait box and it's on the very edge so that the rest of it is just bare space. Once a bait box is populated, I wouldn't wait too long to put your frames in it. So once they've decided your whole swarm's moved in, I would not wait more than 48 hours to put the rest of those frames in for them to build. Otherwise, you're going to have free-form comb. I'm just looking, the next part, there's a few questions just coming in. I was just reading those. So, okay, when is it too late to remove a queen cell, egg or capped? Queen cell, so that's the other thing we talked about, removing queen cells. They're not a true queen cell until they've got a larvae in them. And that's when you can tell that they're actually going to use this queen cup, turn it into a queen cell. You can remove it as immediately if you want to use that strategy for management. But your best option for that would be to wait until it is capped, then remove it intact where possible. And then you can use that to start another colony if you want to make a split with that. It'd be a little bit too fragile to move it before it's capped if you wanted to keep the queen cell alive. What position for one frame, middle or against one side of the bait box? Always up against one side so that the rest of the area is an open area. And there was another question. Split both my hive and have nukes ready to go. My main issue is finding the queen as the bees numbers are so high. Any suggestions on finding my queens? Practice is for finding queens. It's hard, and sometimes they don't want you. We have seen, this is interesting, we have seen in the past when bees have decided that they are going to swarm and they're making queen cells, they can defend those cells really well and make it difficult for you to get down into the brood box. So finding those queens, doing those splits can be a little bit painful, yes, definitely. There are some things you can do about that. I'm just trying to think. The best strategy would be to not actually have to find the queen as such, and it's just you're removing very gently frames of brood with nurses, making sure you don't have the queen, and having the queen cell with that. And then so you can check that you don't have the queen rather than trying to find the queen. Okay, I've got 5 queen cells in my hive. Do I put all those queen cells in my split or just one? You can put all them in, and generally what will happen if you have multiple swarm cells, queen cells, the first queen to emerge will put out a high-pitched chirp, piping noise, we call it, and you can YouTube it and you can actually hear queens piping. What that is, it's basically a call that the first queen emits, and the other queens that can sometimes be hours or within a day or two away from emerging can't help themselves but to respond from inside their cells. And this is one of the only purposes a queen ever uses her stinger for, and it's a non-barbed stinger on a queen, is the queen will go around and stab those other queens to death whilst they're still in their cells. So generally, they'll work that out themselves. If you were to leave multiple swarm cells in a colony and not manage it in any way, the bees can guard those additional queen cells and prevent the new queen from killing off those other queens. So that's when we have multiple swarms from one colony. And then what will happen is that new queen will realize that she can't kill off the threat of the other queens, and she will then swarm as well. So that's when we see 2, 3, and 4 swarms from a single box. That is why that's happened, is because they can afford to. Again, they've got enough numbers to do it, but in the end you get left with not many bees at all. So if you're going to take those queen cells out, put them all together in the nuke, and then let the queen that emerges manage that. And so, yeah, the last of that, I suppose, is when it all fails, and it will all fail, you'll think you've got this all sorted and your bees will swarm. it's going and catching your swarm. So that's something that all beekeepers should have a go at some point in their beekeeping career, is going and catching a swarm. It's for anyone who hasn't done it, it's an amazing thing. It's when they're accessible, more so. Getting to them and seeing a beautiful little cluster of bees that you can gently put into a box of some sort, and when they're swarming, incredibly passive, and you're collecting it, whether it's yours or not. And again, with your apiary code of practice, you can collect swarms and have them for up to 14 days above and beyond your hive capacity of your land size. So you do have the ability to do these things, and it's good etiquette to go and do these things. And especially if it's your own swarm, then it's a no-brainer that you go and collect your swarm. So that's, I suppose, the basics of swarming. This is the time right now. We've seen our actions set off bee swarms before. Bees have been close to swarming. We've left it a little bit too long. We've opened the box up. Whilst handling a frame with a queen cell on it, the movement of turning that frame horizontal or moving it around too much is enough to let that new queen emerge. And so she'll come out mid-inspection, and you can have a swarm whilst you're standing in the middle of your open hive. So again, back to that 10 days, getting in there every 10 to 12 days. You want to not be leaving it much beyond 12 days. And that's when you know what's going on and you can manage what's going on. So I think that's kind of the basics of it covered. Hopefully, if that leads into some questions and answers, and we can drill down on some detail there.
Thank you so much, Matt. There is just one from Julia down the bottom that says, what's the best time to split a hive, day or night? If you split the hive, should you place near the original one?
Okay. Generally, when we work bees, we usually look for the middle of the day when they're least busy. That is still probably the best time to split a hive, but keeping in mind your workers are going to come back to the original box in the original position. So there are some methods of splitting where you want to collect the foragers coming back to the original box to increase their numbers. So you'll sometimes then put your your new queen, and then there's other methods where you'll leave the old queen there because they're her workers. So you just have to pick one of the methods of splitting because there's so many of them. Like my basic is just divide resources, split it up, make sure more go into the split because some will go home. So just working out which method you're going to do and stick with that. Just keeping that in mind. If you do it in the day, your foragers are going to come back to the original box. That is where they have located as their home. So you will get an increase of numbers coming back to that, so you can afford to take more.
Thanks, Matt. Does anyone else have any other questions? You don't need to type it in. You can just unmute yourself and ask Matt a question.
Matt?
Yep.
If you've got hive, which is, I've got a 2-box hive, one of them's still got quite a bit of space. Does that mean that because they've still got quite a bit of space, they won't swarm, or they still could swarm?
They shouldn't swarm. And well, they shouldn't swarm because of overcrowding. Another thing that we do see, and I didn't cover, is we sometimes can give our bees too much space. And now in Victoria, we do have the issue of small hive beetle. Small hive beetle can run rampant, and so can wax moth in a colony with too much space. So the bees need to be able to guard that space and keep that space warm. And so it's a balancing act of making sure there's enough room, but not too much room, because they still need to manage it. If they can't manage it and they get overrun with small hive beetle that they can't guard and keep cornered into one spot, or if wax moth starts to overrun the colony, the bees can abscond, and that is the whole colony leaves. It's becoming more common with small hive beetle than we were ever used to. When we started, it was not even a real thing as bees absconding, especially with Apis mellifera. But now we do see it when they get so overrun with beetle. So
that's because I split some hives last year,
Yep.
and I end up having 8 hives. Now I'm back down to 5 because wax moth just took over the whole hive.
Yeah.
Like all 3 hives, just wax moth everywhere.
Yeah, so that would be too much space. Absolutely not too much space. The colonies aren't strong enough to manage that space. So that's what you have to keep that in mind. We've seen some people where they have split and the splits haven't gone so well, where they've even pulled them back into 3 or 2 frame nukes just to get them strong enough to then go back up in size. So it's making sure that they can manage their space, but they still have space to lay and grow. So for you, having 2 boxes, is that too much space? This time of year, I would generally say no, it's about right. Provided the bottom box is completely full and they are overflowed into the second box, then of course. But if you've got 2 boxes on and they've only really on 6 frames in total, there's no point in having 16 frames if they haven't even utilized 1 box yet. So when we're adding boxes to our colony, we generally want the bees to be using the inside of the frame number 1 and number 8. Once they're on all the frames and they're starting to utilize those 2 outside frames, that's time to go up to another box. That's generally so we don't add too many boxes. Some people, we used to hear about people going away for a couple of weeks at a time and putting 2 or 3 boxes on to prevent swarming. Again, now with that small hive beetle and those kinds of issues, you can't get away with that kind of thing. And it isn't a real solution. So in answer to the question, if they're on more than 8 frames, 2 boxes is fine. If they're on less than 8 frames, they can be in 1 box.
Matt, I'm wanting to change my Langstroth stacking boxes to a long lang. At what time of the season can I change that over?
As soon as it's warm enough to inspect your colony, I would change it over. Yeah.
There's no particular better time to do it or not?
Your bees are most content when they're busy and on good flow. So when we talk about when do we requeen, when do we split, when do we want to graft, it is when the bees are on the heaviest flows and doing well because they're happy and they basically accept anything. If you can go in there and the bees are happy for you to do an inspection, you should have no problem in transferring them to another box. Okay. But keeping in mind your long lang, you want to put your dividers in and let it grow with them.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Right. Does anyone else have any other questions? Like to unmute yourself? Matt, I have a quick question.
A couple of comments to throw in if there's no questions, but if there is a question.
I just have one question. Yep. Phil, sorry.
Matt, yep.
Yeah, Matt, I just wondered, it was my question about too late to remove a queen cell. So if we go in on, let's say, day 11 or day 12 and we see a queen cell but it's open and there is no egg in there, would that be all right to remove it and consider that they're not going to swarm? Or is it once the egg is in there, they're really,
Well, removing it right then and there with no egg in it, so a queen cup or a queen cup, that they're starting to draw out further.
Yeah.
You can definitely remove that, and knowing that that's happened, you've still got 16 days.
Yes, so as long as you keep on top of that, you think they're
That's
not.
right. So if you go back in 10 days and they've drawn another one out and then it's got a cup in it, you're like, these guys are going to swarm.
Yeah.
But then why are they wanting to swarm?
Yeah.
And it can, also, I'm just trying to think of other scenarios. It's placement. It's interesting. We talk about Apis cerana, Apis dorsata, and the other species of bees, and they get bad reputations because they're so swarmy. The reason they're swarmy is they're intolerant of bad conditions. Apis mellifera seem to be one of the only species of bee that we know of, and we think it's through domestication of this bee and selective breeding, that they will put up with adverse conditions to the point where they'll starve to death in their hive. We see that. As where Apis cerana, 2 weeks in bad conditions and they'll relocate. So again, have humans de-evolved this species of bee? And it is a real question.
What I might do is just take an opportunity for everyone to say thank you to Matt. If there is no more questions, Matt, you're very welcome to stay till the end. Everyone can give him a clap down the bottom. You can do reactions as well. Thank you very much, Matt. It was really, really informative, and it led us down to asking some great questions and conversation about what's about to come. So really informative. Thank you very much. You're welcome to stay on and have more of these chats, or if no one else has got any questions, you're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. There was one question I just saw come in, which is actually interesting. Will a queen excluder be an issue for a swarm? We have heard all sorts of theories about stopping swarms, and some of them involve clipping the wings of a queen. And one of them was a theory: if you put a queen excluder between your bottom box and your base, that the queen couldn't get out to swarm. So what you'll see then is your workers coming out and swarming and sitting as a bunch in their first hop, waiting for the queen to join them. And the queen does not, and they come back to the hive, can sometimes be half an hour later. They'll try that a couple of times and can sometimes either get disgruntled and become extremely aggressive as a hive, or all the workers will move on, and we'll see that swarm basically be a queenless swarm that can then will collapse in the future because there is no queen. But having said that, we're all here to have fun. We will make mistakes. We will have swarms. Go and collect them. Collecting swarms is good fun. And yeah, just enjoying it. And it's not a failure of a beekeeper if you have a swarm. It's what bees do, and we just have to know how to manage it the best we can. We love swarms, the general public not so much, and so just doing what we can to make it the best we can for them. So again, thanks for having us, and I'll stick around for a little bit, and it'll be good.
Thanks, Matt.